Hello and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast, episode 45. I'm just out walking the dog in the beautiful sunshine at the moment, over the common near the back of my house, and just breathing in the beautiful fresh air. I'm sure with all this COVID-19 coronavirus malarkey that the air is definitely clearer. There's much less pollution. I mean, I've been looking at the stars at night as well from my back garden, and it has just been absolutely astonishingly beautiful in the sky. It's amazing the effect humanity grinding to a halt can have on our planet. I think that is one of the major positives that have come out of this, is that the earth seems to be regenerating, and the rivers and the lakes and the seas seem to be clearing up. Apparently the ozone layer is starting to repair itself. It just goes to show what a damaging effect we have on the planet. Aside from that, lockdown is going okay. I've had a couple of days where I felt a little bit low. And the obvious reason for feeling a little low is not being able to see my parents not being able to see my baby. And also just not being able to go to my 12-step meetings and see my fellows and my friends outside of the fellowship as well. It's the lack of connection, isn't it, that we crave. And thank God for modern technology. Thank God for Zoom, Skype, Facebook, Twitter, and podcasts as well. Thank God that we have all this technology, because if we didn't, it would be so much more isolating than it already is. And this time has afforded me a lot of reflection. I've been listening to a lot of my old music, and today's podcast is with a person, Melissa F., who I know from my hard house raving days back in the early 2000s. Mel and I used to go to the same clubs, and even though we weren't particularly friends, more associates, we were part of a huge group that all went to the same clubs and listened to the same music. So, we used to see each other regularly, and she's the only person from back then who I actually know who's got into some sort of formal recovery, who's actually abstinent from drugs and alcohol, like I am. So yeah, it was a really nice conversation to have, very nostalgic, and Mel's just celebrated 7 years sobriety, and she's living an amazing life out in Cape Town. Due to the distance, there was a little bit of technical difficulty with the Skype call, so it kind of dropped out a few times, so apologies for that. And after the conversation, I was really inspired to create a hard house mix of all my old classic tracks, which I used to play when I DJ'd during my career, which spanned from the year 2000 all the way up to the year 2014. So 14 years worth of memories, and it was just enjoyable having a mix. I haven't had a mix for about 5 years, so it was great putting the music together. I hope you enjoy it. The link to that mix will be underneath the podcast if you fancy having a listen. And please don't forget, as usual, to support the podcast via patreon.com/lifeinrecovery. Please subscribe to the podcast and rate the podcast on your app. And without further ado, I give you Melissa F. And then it was just crazy to know that out of all the people that we used to go raving with, that I think you're the only person that I know of that has actually kind of gone into any sort of formal recovery and gone down a similar route to me.
Yeah.
Which is bizarre, really.
It is, because there was a lot of us, wasn't there?
And a lot of casualties.
There was a lot of us in one room at the same time on a Thursday night, which usually had started the Friday before. So,
So where did it all begin for you then?
if you're talking about my addiction, I think it really started when I was younger, and I think it started with the sucking of the thumb. Like that was my first addiction. If I really think about it, and through working on myself and working with therapists and a sponsor through the 12 steps, different things have started to unfold. And so I guess, sucking my thumb was a comfort because, I couldn't be with people. And maybe that was, my need, my little love addict that was in there, was there. And then after that, shortly came food. And I put on weight as a kid, probably up until about 15, which is, wait for it, when I found the party powders. And then I lost weight. Oh, look at that. So, it really started, from people looking in with food. But I guess back then it wasn't looked at as addiction, It was just, she's a bit chubby. She eats a bit too much. I also didn't exercise. So, and I didn't even know what a green smoothie was then.
Yeah.
So, it definitely started with people and food, and then probably around 14 was when I discovered, kind of close to that, cigarettes and alcohol first.
Yeah.
Then a bit of weed. And I always promised myself that I would never do this.
Yeah.
And this is what reiterates, that it doesn't matter what you thought you were going to do.
Was there any addiction in the household?
So, not directly in the household because my sister had already left, but my sister left at 15. And she left to seek a professional career in heroin consumption.
Right.
And so I don't know. There's a few vague memories of her coming back to the house and it being very unmanageable, and my mum trying to keep me away from any drama that would kick off. But I think, I always wondered, why is she not around? Why is she not here for me? Me. Like, where's my sister? And I think the older I got and the more I found out about the fact that she did have a drug problem, that was another reason for me to say, I will never do that.
Yeah. But
I did. And it started very innocently.
Is she still using your sister, or is she clean?
She is a lot better than she was, but she's not clean like we're clean.
Right.
She's in her 50s now, and she's been using shit since she was 15.
Blimey.
Yeah.
A long career.
And yeah, a really long career. And, it just makes me think about, there's a few little sayings, in the circles that we follow, and it's, like, your higher power, God, the universe, has kept you alive for a reason. And he's kept her alive for a reason as well. Even though she doesn't work a program or necessarily do the same things as me, she has dipped her toe in, and I think she's, and this is just my opinion, and only from what I've learned in my own experience, I think there's so much trauma that she needs to work through. She's terrified, and you know what it's like to start unpacking. You have to really be ready, and I just don't think she's ready. So she's trying in her own way.
Yeah.
And she's, she'll, even if she says she's clean, she's not clean like we understand clean to be, which is absolutely no mood or mind altering drugs, including alcohol. You know, her idea of clean is, I haven't used heroin or crack, you know, but she'll
Yeah.
have a drink, or she'll have a smoke of some marijuana.
Yeah.
So it's a very different life, and I've really had to try and show up in support, even though it's very difficult to hear, you know. And I'm like, come to this side, it's much better.
She's back in the UK.
She's in Scotland. She's been in
Scotland.
Scotland for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I was going to say, I was going to actually ask you the question, but I think you answered it really. What do you think the barrier is in terms of a kind of like coming into formal recovery or kind of like taking those steps? But I think the answer was that there's too much trauma there. And yeah, I see that a lot. I think it's really, really scary, isn't it, for people to think that they're going to even have to talk about it, let alone deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the reality of it. And it took me 2 years to get clean, you know, from threatening to get clean and thinking that I wanted it, and, you know, not knowing that there was help and support out there, just trying to do it by myself.
Yeah.
You know, and I would gain, you know, a little bit of abstinence, and then the novelty would wear off. Or, you know, I remember speaking to my godmother about it, and, you know, saying that I really need help, and she said, I'm going to have to tell your mum. And I was like, oh my God. I'm fine, it's all good, I can sort this out myself, you know. And I was like, oh my God.
I didn't mean it.
Yeah, exactly. And I did that loads of times. And I think there was one time where she caught me in her kitchen. You know, I'd snuck in to make a cup of tea, you know, and I was sneakily doing something in the kitchen that I shouldn't have done. And she came in and she's like, what are you doing? And I was like, nothing. She's like, show me your hands. So I showed her the opposite hand. And she's like, come on, show me. And I showed her. And I think that was a really big turning point. And she said to me, if I ever catch you doing things in my house again, I'll cut you off. I'll never speak to you again. And I was like, wow, okay. And it was very close to that time that I reached out to my godmother again, and I said, I really need help. And I started researching rehabs in England and saw the price of it and was like, how am I even going to get there?
What had you moved on to by then in terms of drugs?
So the thing that really, really screwed me over was ketamine.
Was it? Yeah.
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 Yeah. I mean, I was doing it every day.
There's a lot of people got into that drug around the early 2000s.
Yeah, and the late 2000s, you know, and like, because I came in 2013.
Yeah.
And you know what the thing is? No matter how many people had been admitted to hospital, had their symptoms removed, had a catheter installed, I still kept schnaufing. I was like, I'm fine. That won't happen to me. I don't have much of a problem.
How are you taking it? Were you snorting it then?
Yeah.
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 Just
And I know other people were doing it, you know, differently.
Yeah. I heard reports of people like sprinkling it on the cornflakes and stuff.
Stop it.
That's what people used to do.
No. Oh my God. No.
Yeah, it's only a drug that I tried a few times. I didn't really get into it in a big way, but it kind of, I mean, it's a complete dissociative, isn't it? So if you're using it in high amounts, then you are completely like disassociated from life.
Yeah.
And I suppose that was what you wanted, really.
I did. I really did. But, you know, towards the end, and I say this towards the end, I would probably say that probably spans over a year. Because let's get real, from the day that I started, or the year that I started using drugs, it was half of my life. It was 14 years old up until 28. So, you know, with various different drugs. And, you know, if I stopped using the ket, I started using something else, you know, and it never dawned on me at the time that that was an issue. Only when I got into recovery. But I started to trip over my tongue. My speech was slurred. even when I was sober, and sober wasn't really sober, but even if I took a break from it, for a couple of days or a week, or I think a couple of months, because a friend had threatened to fall out with me because he was like, I can't keep seeing you like this, because I would have panic attacks. And I would have panic attacks whilst I was in the house by myself. I'd have blackouts where I would, come around and I'd be like, how did I get here? Or I'd made a phone call and had a meltdown, and my friend would phone me or show up at the door and was like, what is going on? And I had no recollection. And I was like, just in a complete state. And, my body was giving me telltale signs long before I decided to get clean. That I needed to stop. And, I just didn't listen. And I remember getting very frustrated with myself and, even speaking to people, tripping over my tongue, not being able to get my words out, and then getting frustrated and thinking, well, I may as well not talk. So you can imagine what that did to me. Person. And I went really introvert. And then I started to shut myself away and think, well, there's no point in going out. I may as well get wasted at home. And a lot of the time, friends would come over. We would have full intentions of going out on a night out. We'd spend 2 hours getting ready, have our little treats and our glass of wine and some food, and either go out for half an hour to an hour and end up going back to mine or somebody else's, or B, never even make it out the door.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it, really? So when you obviously started like smoking weed at the age of 14, and then how did it progress through to ketamine then?
Very slowly, actually. I mean, I did hang around with a bunch of stoners probably until I was about 16, and that was whilst I lived in Otley, in the little market town.
Yeah.
And then, obviously drinking, smoking weed. There was a couple of people in the group that on a weekend would come over, typical bedroom party, decks going, bongs going. The occasional person would bring some E's, some pills. I tried speed. I was like, I'm terrified of taking an E. There were so many horror stories of people dying. And also with that thought of my sister in the back of my mind, I was like, I'm not going to do it. And then I tried a little bit of speed, and I tried some mushrooms. And I mean, the mushrooms for me were like, wow, magic carpet ride, dude. Like, transported into the next dimension. The walls are floating. I was an artist, like, wonderful. I have arrived. Yeah. So, yeah, I tried some speed, and it was, you remember the hard house days well, I am sure.
Of course I do, yeah. That was my scene.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was basically pills, speed, chibi, coke, all of the party drugs.
Yeah.
Through the hard house scene. And then I progressed into the deep house minimal techno scene.
So during the hard house scene, like, when did you get into that? What kind of year was that?
Oh gosh, the first Sunday Central I went to, I think I was 16.
So what year was that then?
I don't know. A long time ago.
How old are you now?
I'm 35.
35. So it's about 2000, around that
yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I moved
2001,
to Leeds.
something like that.
Yeah, I moved to Leeds in 2000, and well, I won a DJ competition, and then won a residency at Parlez-Vous, and I was DJing at Parlez-Vous and Housewives' Choice, and then started when Housewives started running the back room in Sunday Central. That was my introduction to Sunday Central, and it was like the greatest thing that I'd ever experienced in my life. In fact, somebody posted a video of it the other day on Facebook. It was the Tidy Boys who posted a video of, that Sunday Central at Evolution in Leeds.
Oh my gosh!
And
flashback.
Oh my god! It was like euphoric recall instantly. Like all the faces, like all the music, the vibe. But actually, the funny thing about it was, I was sat there, in my lounge watching it, and I was thinking, like, even though all that euphoric recall was coming back, I just looked at it and I just thought, with these eyes now, with recovery eyes, it's such a strange thing to look at it, because people are just literally stood on the spot, gurning the faces off, flailing their arms around a little bit. You know, they're absolutely off in their own little worlds. And
Yeah.
actually, what it really looks like, and I don't mean this derogatory to anybody that's still into clubbing, but it just looked like a mental asylum.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and I just thought to myself, I mean, the reason why I actually gave up DJing was because, I mean, I got sober, and then I got back into DJing in 2000, and I think it was about 2011, and me and Lee Green partnered up as a DJ duo, and we got back into the hard house scene. And we, you know, the one thing I always wanted to achieve was like DJing at the Tidy Weekenders, and, you know, DJing in Ibiza and all that stuff. And we actually achieved that within the space of about 18 months. And you know, and I kind of like, I achieved all my dreams, and I was DJing at the Ideal Weekender, and it was the last gig that I ever played, because I was on the decks, and, you know, the room was packed, and I just looked out across this kind of like sea of clubbers, and I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just not feeling it. Like, there's it feels as though I'm in a room of kind of like quite unwell people.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And again, I don't want that to sound like, I don't know how it also, I don't want it to sound horrible or arrogant or anything, but I just thought, like, I've moved away from this now. You know, like,
Yeah.
I've changed my life, and this isn't where I want to be. And kind of like, almost like morally, I just thought, I can't continue down this road anymore. So I hung up my headphones, and that was it. That was the last gig I ever played.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was in 2015, I think.
Wow.
But what do you think? Do you think that the majority of people that we were surrounded by were self-medicating?
Well, I guess I can only really speak for myself, but, you know, when you were just talking about, you know, like a room full of unwell people, I know that at the beginning, that wasn't my intention.
No.
You know, my intention was not to self-medicate. My intention was to go out and have fun and make friends and dance and, you know, just enjoy my, you know, because everything else was rather boring. You know, life was really rather boring.
Yeah.
You know, and I needed some excitement. You know, I grew up in a little market town. I knew from a very young age that I didn't want to be there. I always wanted more. I needed stimulating. I needed excitement, the outdoors, movement, you know, and I was very frustrated. So when I found this collection of people that wanted that as well, and it happened to be in the form of really fast music and really fast dancing, you know, and bright fluorescent clothing and face paint, I was like, guys, where have you been all my life?
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, this is ace.
Yeah.
You know, like, roll on that weekend of the month where I can escape to Kirkstall, you know.
Yeah.
And then that progressed into, you know, clubbing during the week. And it's funny because you said it reminded me of like a mental institution. You know, I'm sure there was a night that was actually called Asylum in Leeds. You know, and very, very similar names crop up, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, you know, we've lost people, haven't we? I mean, we've had people die in our friendship circle along the way.
Yeah.
Through various ways, you know, and it's a result of addiction, you know, and that's just my understanding, and I'm not pointing any fingers, you know, or blaming or, you know, shaming anybody, but it's just my understanding that there were a handful of people that were very unhappy, just as I was unhappy to, you know, during my my days on the club scene. Whether that was a result of too many drugs or whether it was a result of unprocessed trauma, I think it was a collection of the two.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just the further you get into it, the deeper into the rabbit hole you go. So I think there's many answers to that question.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that like ultimately what we were all looking for was connection, weren't we? We were looking for a tribe.
Big time.
And
Yeah.
you know, even though like you and I were in kind of like separate social groups, but then we all came together as one big group, and it was like
Yeah.
everybody knew everybody. And then once you'd started taking the drugs, especially the ecstasy, you know, like we all loved each other, and it was like free love. It was almost kind of like how I imagine the kind of 60s to be, really.
Yeah.
But just a lot, like you say, a lot faster and a lot harder. But yeah, I think that like what happened, what in my observation of it was that around kind of the late 2000s, the majority of people who I used to go clubbing with kind of started to settle down, and you know they got decent jobs, and like they had children, you know, like long-term partners and stuff, and they started to fall by the wayside when it came to the clubbing, whereas I just kept going. And even though the music changed, you know, it went from hard house to, like you said, like deep techno and tech house and all that kind of stuff. It was like I was still going out 3 times a week, you know, even though I had a full-time job. I was getting absolutely wasted, blacking out, you know, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning on the street in Leeds, not knowing where I was. And I've got work at 9 o'clock in the morning, you know, and
Yeah.
it was the last kind of, I think 2007, 2008 was just, you know, the end, the kind of beginning of the end for me.
Yeah.
And it all just, yeah, it just kind of like got darker and darker and darker. So, and for me personally, I know that that's because I had underlying issues, you know, that I wasn't aware of those at the time, but I certainly wasn't dealing with them.
Yeah.
And I didn't start to deal with those until I came into recovery.
Yeah. I mean, that you've hit the nail on the head there. And I know there's a lot of people that have been able to, you know, walk away and still go out every now and again. And, you know, a little piece of me inside there really envies that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, wicked, you know, good for you. You can go out once a month and, you know, have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and still go to work, and you've grown up and you may have moved to London and, you know, or you've moved abroad and you still go out and have a good time and have a drink and, you know, dabble in a little bit of party powder every now and again. I can't do that. I don't want to risk all that I've worked for, you know, since deciding that I needed to completely wipe my slate clean. I might be able to do that, but I don't want to take that risk.
No.
And you said that 2008, 2007, 2008 was the beginning of the end. That was really the beginning for me. That my really started to hit the fan, because that's where I'm in, and I went to Ibiza, and I did 2007 and 2008 as a season. And that's where my love for ketamine emerged, because and I'm jumping back because I realized I didn't even, you know, finish answering how I managed to get to ketamine. And that's because I tried it whilst we were still in the hard house scene.
Yeah.
And somebody gave me too much and it sent my head spinning. And I remember having to run away to someone's bedroom and hide under the covers, because I went into a chaos and I didn't fell out for 2 years. I didn't touch the stuff. I was like, no, it's awful. And then a different friends that I was partying with gave me a tiny little bit on the end of a key, and that was it. That was my love affair with it. I got to Ibiza. I got friends there, new friends that were using it, and you know, I got introduced to it in a different light, and that for me was like 5 years. You know, I had 2 seasons in Ibiza. I came back, and you know what it's like in Ibiza. It's almost like time stands still, but you get back to UK and reality. You're not partying 7 days a week. There isn't clubbing 7 days a week. You get back to normality where people have a 9 to 5, they go out on weekends, and people have moved on. And I got back and my friends had moved on. My circle of friends had changed. and I'd lost the connection.
Mm.
And then I was like, what am I going to do? So I got myself a job as soon as I could, and I was unhappy in that job. And I really started to self-medicate then, going back to what you'd said before.
Yeah.
That was my story. I started to self-medicate just to get myself through the depression of coming back from Ibiza, and having fun for 5 months, coming back to 6 hours of daylight, and friends that had gone separate ways. And I was like, I don't even know who I am anymore,
So you were
and that was the only way that I could cope.
So you're like disconnected at that point.
Completely.
Mm.
Completely. And I remained in that hole and just functioning, and I justified it because I still paid my bills. I still went to work. I still had a car. I was still in touch with my family, but really I'd isolated myself so much that I really, all I really had was oxygen in my lungs and money in my bank. I didn't really have a life, I was dying inside. And I think it was probably around 2011, maybe 2012, or maybe it was before that. I hit a rock bottom, but that rock bottom wasn't enough to propel me into recovery. That rock bottom was enough for me to admit that I had a problem to my manager at work.
Yeah.
And to change my job. So I changed my job.
What were you doing for work at the time?
So at the time I was working in the White Rose Centre in a shop, and I'd been used to working in clubs, bars. I worked for a very well-known cyber shop.
Oh yeah.
And I was the manager. I mean, like life and soul, and and then I found myself in the White Rose Centre in this shopping mall where I just felt like I was driving to my misery every day. And don't get me wrong, like the people around me were really cool and we had a great laugh, but it wasn't me. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
It wasn't me, and I didn't know how to break away from it. But also people that moved to London, I think, got out of this scene a lot quicker than maybe you or I.
Yeah.
I know they got out before I did, because it really is a scene in Leeds, especially with the Ket. For me, I mean, just big Ket scene.
Well, I got sober in London.
Yeah.
Well, I got sober in Australia, but I actually then once I was clean and sober, I actually went to AA in London, and that's where I lived for 5 years.
Oh wow.
So the recovery there was was awesome. It was 24/7 meetings basically, which I definitely needed.
Yeah.
So what did?
Yeah, I mean.
I was just going to say, what was your kind of slide then from the working in the White Rose and medicating yourself with ketamine to actually getting into recovery?
Well, I think just admitting to somebody that I had an issue, because my manager at the time thought that I was drinking, because I mean I would show up to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, fucked.
Yeah.
And he thought that I'd been drinking, and it was actually because I'd had a cheeky little line of ket before I went. I had 5 o'clock in the morning, so it's the only thing that I could pick myself up to get myself going again. And he's such a lovely guy, and I mean, he was just like, I can see you've got a problem. I'm not going to fire you, but I'm going to tell you that you need to get some help.
Yeah.
And I think just having somebody that supported me, that was just like, I see you, I get it, you need to speak up, you need to tell your mum, and I did. I told my mum, and I think that was the starting point. And like I said to you, it was a good 2, maybe 3 years. I think it was 2 years before I actually got clean. And I sorted my head out. I was much happier once I left that job. I went into hospitality again, just the interaction with people. I started working for a restaurant, and then I went to so I worked for a restaurant that terrified me because we had such strict training regime. And then from there I left and I went to work for Jamie Oliver's, and I stayed there for like 2 years and I loved it. And the team were great and we had loads of fun. And I could manage my going out work situation. Actually, sorry, there was I was diesel in Leeds for a before going to hospitality, because I thought maybe it's just the store in the White Rose. Then I quickly realised it was retail. Like, I was bored,
Yeah.
so I went into hospitality again, and I started to notice my behaviour was changing whilst I was at work, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not going to go into this again. And I started to go out again, and it was a slippery slope of slipping back into those old ways. And I realized that I was either going to lose my job, create a lot of trouble for myself at work, and my workmates didn't deserve that, and neither did I. So I started to research treatment centres in England, and I think I had a big whilst I'd visited London. It was during the early hours of the morning, powder-filled chats, and I just broke down to her and I said to her, where is that outgoing person? It got to that stage again. Where's that outgoing person that will drive, an hour to Manchester to go and visit a mate, even if it's just for a night? Where's that musician, that had a music scholarship? Where's that person that wanted to be a DJ? Who am I? And I just didn't know who I was anymore. And I'd been to that rock bottom a couple of years before, and I was so terrified to go there again. So I reached out, and it was my godmother that said to me, have you ever thought about going overseas? And I was like, oh my God, get me on the plane, and she said that she worked for somebody that had been to rehab in South Africa. Would I be prepared to come to Cape Town? And I was like, sign me up. And I think 2 weeks later, and a lot of persuading my mum, I got on the plane. And the rest is history. I thought I was going to come for 2 weeks. I thought that I was only going to give up the powders and that occasionally I would have some hallucinogens. I never imagined that coming into recovery would mean that I would give up alcohol, I would give up cigarettes, I would give up all of the drugs. That was not my intention. My intention was to stop ket and probably coke and just have a little magic carpet ride every now and again and still have a drink. But they educated me to the consequences, and if I use one thing, it's going to inevitably lead to the other. And I tell you what, it probably took me 18 months to actually make peace with the fact that I am also an alcoholic. I can't drink and I cannot use drugs, because if I have a drink, and I know this from my own past behaviors of being clean without being clean, it's as soon as I have a drink that I pick up the phone and I phone somebody and we get some treats.
It's not really treats.
So like, no, they're not treats, but they were then.
Yeah.
I never imagined that recovery would be as it is today.
And that was 7 years ago, so you've just celebrated 7 years.
7 years. I thought 7 days was a long time at one point.
Congratulations, yeah, it's amazing.
Thank you.
So
thank you so much.
What's it been like then, life in recovery?
Mental.
Well,
I live in Cape Town.
Yeah, first of all, what was the rehab like?
The rehab was I mean, there's so many answers to this question as well. The rehab was essential for me to be where I am now. You know, and I know a lot of people get clean and sober without rehab, and they do it via 12-step meetings, and I commend them. I, on the other hand, really needed to separate myself from life, normality, any associations, any triggers, family, friends, even the country. You know, I needed to go and experience life somewhere else, and, you know, somewhere that had not used drugs or taken a drink. So the rehab for me, you know, there was a lot of people that jumped the fence in that rehab. You know, I was terrified to jump the fence because I was in South Africa and I didn't know what was on the other side of the fence. So rehab for me was more like going back to boarding school. You know, we had chores, we had to be up at a certain time, we had like morning responsibilities, we had groups, we had a lunch break, we had a mid-morning break, an afternoon break, you know, and then we had responsibilities in the evening, you know. So for me, it was like boarding school. So that was like a pro and a con at the same time, because I hated boarding school. But because I'd made this decision myself and I wasn't forced into going, you know, like I was at boarding school, I think, you know, I was willing to do anything it took for me to have this better life. And I literally sat there with my pen and paper saying, yes, of course, yes, I will. And honestly, a lot of it was bullshit. I was lying to myself. I was lying to them. I wasn't fully exposing myself probably until the last 2 weeks. And I was there for 3 months. So I was still in a lot of denial, a lot of fear. But, you know, I learned just how to reach out and ask for help. And a lot of the time I was forced to ask for help. And I guess I just started piecing myself back together slowly but surely.
I imagine that it was probably the first time you've ever been truly honest as well, wasn't it?
I mean, truly honest to myself, yeah, because there was many nights, you know, whilst I was intoxicated, that I'd get honest with friends. But then, you know, the following day, it was business as usual. You know, and I promised myself many times whilst I was at work, I'm going to go home tonight, I'm going to have a hot bath, I'm going to have a nice evening, and I'm not going to use drugs. And sometimes even by the end of my shift, I'd already phoned somebody before I got in the car, because I was lonely. You know, I lived by myself.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize how lonely I actually was. So to be really honest with myself, I think, was the most important thing, because I was honest with other people, you know, for a long time before I got into recovery.
And what did you uncover the things that you were kind of masking them with the drugs?
I think I thought that nobody would like me. I think, that was one of the main things that came up. You know, in the early days of treatment, you know, when they give you these questions and, you know, you read out these answers, and it's like you start to really know yourself and see what's going on and what you've been hiding. For me, what I found was I didn't think anybody would like me sober, and that's because I didn't think I would like myself sober, because I remember what a little bitch I was as a teenager, you know. And you know, what I later discovered was frustration and not really knowing how to channel my energy and my emotions, and, you know, being in an environment where I didn't feel heard and where I didn't feel seen unless I was performing music or acting out, I guess, or causing drama. You know, I definitely got attention then. So and that doesn't mean that there wasn't love and affection in my household, because there was. Um, you know, there was just this element of me that really wanted to be seen and really wanted to be heard. And, I was seen and I was heard when I was with my mates doing whatever we were doing, even in a social environment, not necessarily getting wasted. Um, my friends became my family. So they didn't know me sober because we'd only known each other through this scene. And that scene started years before. So to actually think about being sober, I didn't know myself, and I didn't know how to be, like, I didn't know who that person was.
That kind of need to be seen suggests to me, without kind of psychoanalyzing you though, it suggests to me that you felt as though you weren't seen at home when you were a child. I mean, do you think that both you and your sister experienced that in some way? Was that kind of your trauma?
Well, I know that, I mean, I can't speak for my sister, but I know that from my understanding, through what I've done on myself, I can relate her behavior to mine. So her dad died when he was 15. So if I can just put a little piece of the puzzle together, that's when her using started. That's when she left home. Whether she was using before that or not, it's a bit vague. But her dad at 15 was murdered in a fight in that little market town. Apparently he was known to be quite like somebody that you didn't mess with. And there was a situation where somebody challenged him to a fight, and they showed up with a baseball bat and they smacked him around the head, and he died. As a 15-year-old girl, I mean, how do you even cope with that?
Yeah, it don't get much more traumatic than that, does it?
Right? I mean, so to run off to Bradford and go to her tribe, which happened to be heroin and crack dealers, and the Rastafarian crew that probably loved her in their own way, and gave her the attention that she needed right then. I think everybody tried to function as best way that they knew how. She gravitated towards the drugs. My mum went into work, and when my stuff hit and my puberty hit, that's exactly what I did, because that's the same age that I started to experiment with drugs. And I think it was a puberty thing.
How old were you then when her dad died?
I wasn't here. I wasn't on the planet yet.
Oh, you weren't born then.
Or I was just born, I think. Yeah. But it was probably 1985. Yeah.
Yeah. But even just that shift in the family must have been, even as a tiny baby, you experience that trauma through those around you. Like, it's those formative years, isn't it? Those first 5-6 formative years as a baby. If there was a lot of, kind of trauma going on in the household, you would have absorbed that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this is only things that you start to uncover once you start to uncover things.
Yeah. Well, I'm like deep interested in this stuff because since I got sober, I mean, I trained to be a counsellor. I worked as a drug and alcohol counsellor in prisons for 4 years, and then I kind of moved into the community, and I'm now a manager in the community. But I've always been really interested in the psychology of addiction, so I've kind of like I wrote a book in 2015 called Addiction Prevention, and then since I've just carried on writing about this stuff. And it's fascinating to me because, like when you first come into recovery, you think, I've got a drink or a drug problem and I just want to stop drinking or I just want to stop using drugs. You don't realise that it's so much deeper than that, and it goes back to the roots of your childhood. You know, everything for me, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you know, trauma, which is subjective, obviously, you know, trauma is different for each individual. Trauma is at the root of all addictions, because I think everybody suffers from the spiritual malady to a greater or lesser degree. And the root of that spiritual malady is your experiences, is the traumatic experiences of life. I don't know if you agree with that or not. What's your take on it?
I completely agree with you. You know, I'm also really interested in this, and you know, through understanding myself, I've been able to understand other people, and also, you know, just have some compassion with members of my family due to this.
Yeah.
Because I have a deep understanding of it now, based on my own experience. So I can see why certain things unfolded as it did. I think mine, when I've really started to unpack things, you know, the drink and the drugs was definitely self-medicating for a large extent of the time. My primary was that seeking connection, and that would stem from, you know, a lack of certain things as a child, definitely. And, you know, talking about this now makes me realize, like, today, drink and drugs is not an issue in my life. I don't think, like, I think about it occasionally, you know, I think about it occasionally, you know, oh, could I? Oh, maybe that ayahuasca retreat's a good idea. No, it's not. What comes up for me now is behaviors and relationship issues, and, you know, how do I manage, you know, food or other process addictions. And I don't know if that makes any sense, you know, because I'm sure there'll be people listening to this that don't really understand that. But, you know, my addiction spans across a whole world of different things. You know, I can use anything to fix my feelings, you know, to make myself feel better if I am anxious, and afraid of something, you know, and, you know, I can channel my energy into something and, like, project it onto another situation just to stop myself feeling what I'm feeling right now. So what I have discovered is that, you know, I can manage myself as a human being today without the use of, without numbing things, without numbing myself. Does that even make any sense at all?
Of course it does. I mean, you've answered the question perfectly, and it's exactly how I view it. I mean, ultimately, you've got an emotional disorder. You know, you can't manage your emotions. You can't sit with yourself. You know, your emotions is something that you never learnt to deal with. If you don't ever manage your emotions and you don't learn to talk about them and process them in a healthy way, that becomes a mental health issue. Then you then start to become anxious. You become depressed, and then the medication for those mental health issues is alcohol and drugs, or sex, or gambling, or whatever substance or behavior relieves that tension from you, and that's where that's what manifests into addictions. And I believe that model is the model of addiction, and I believe also it's the model of the human condition as well, because every single human on this planet suffers from exactly that process, but in different ways, and everybody learns to manage those anxieties and low moods, etc., with different behaviors and different substances. And some people are very, very healthy and learn to manage it through exercise and through meditation, and, you know, and even just talking about it, which is ultimately, I think, what everybody in recovery is aiming for, the ability to be able to just talk about your emotions, talk about the thoughts that are going through your head, and not have to reach for a substance or behavior in order to be able to manage that. I mean, controversially, it's interesting that you mentioned ayahuasca, because I actually did do an ayahuasca retreat. And I did that. I did that in 2000 and when was it? 2017. I mean, funnily enough, I never used psychedelics ever in active addiction, and obviously my primary addiction's alcohol. So I got sober in AA, and when I was in like researching the book that I wrote in 2014-15, this subject of psychedelics and plant medicines came up, and a friend introduced me to the idea of ayahuasca, and at the time I just thought, you're absolutely crazy, mate. There's like, that is a relapse all day long. I wouldn't even entertain it. But because I was researching it for the book, I researched it for probably about 2 or 3 years, and I eventually made the decision to actually go and give it a try. And the reason for that was because also Bill Wilson had done experiments with LSD, and I thought, I want to understand whether this can help people who are suffering from addictions. And also, I was 99.9% confident at the time that it wasn't addictive and it wouldn't lead to a relapse. So I did it, and my experience of it was absolutely life-changing, wonderful, mind-blowing. If I'm totally honest with you, I don't know if it's something that I would ever even consider doing again, because I think that I had the full peak experience, and even though some people listening to this might say, oh well, that's a relapse and you should kind of restart your sobriety date, for me I don't see it that way, but only because it completely helped me on my journey, but also helped to realize that it isn't actually something that you need. If you can have a spiritual experience and change your perception and have that revolution in your thinking without using psychedelics, then definitely don't even think about it. But if you're somebody if you're somebody who really, really struggles, like for example, if somebody had come into a 12-step fellowship and they just simply could not admit that A, they were powerless, and B, a power greater than themselves could restore them to sanity. If you have one of those peak ayahuasca experiences, or psilocybin for that matter, or any other psychedelic in controlled conditions, I don't mean just like doing it in your bedroom on your
bedroom.
Yeah. I did it with the shaman of the Shipibo tribe. So I was doing it like properly under the guidance of experienced shaman, and the point was that there is no way, if you have one of those experiences, you will never ever be able to deny the existence of a higher power, because it's so like, well, it's literally like you meet God. You know what I mean? Like whatever your understanding of it is, you meet your maker. And I came back from that experience just any kind of maybe tiny seed of doubt that I might have had, that is it all bullshit, this idea of a God, of a higher power, that was completely obliterated by that experience. But then 2 years later, I then went on a Vipassana silent meditation retreat for 10 days and had a very similar experience through natural means, through meditation. So that made me realize that actually you don't need to have the psychedelic experience, but it's a tool at the end of the day. That's the way that I look at it. It's not a recreational drug. It's a tool for spiritual experience. And interestingly as well, I'm really into Ram Dass. I mean, I know he died at the beginning of the year, didn't he? At the end of last year. And Ram Dass took psychedelics for years and years and years, and then put them down, and and was just into meditation. And he said exactly the same thing. He said psychedelics will only take you so far. They'll give you these experiences, but you can't keep taking ayahuasca every 5 minutes. You can't keep taking LSD every 5 minutes. Ultimately, there comes a point where you're going to have to be able to live your life without any mind or mood altering substances, as you just said. And that's where I'm at now. I kind of come to the stage now where I don't regret any of these experiences that I've had, but at the same time, I don't think I would imagine that I won't be dipping my toe back into that water again.
Yeah. I've heard similar stories from people, that I know, and I think almost all of the people that I have spoken to that have been on one of these retreats has not had an issue with psychedelics, whereas that was one of my primary drugs of choice.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what scares me. I can. There's the other little Melissa on the other shoulder is like, but it's controlled. It's a spiritual experience. It is. All of what you said. It's going to benefit. It's going to be this, but the other side of it's like, but what if you experience this and something triggers you, and then you're like, oh my God, I missed that. That's what scares me.
Yeah.
So, and my sponsor, my 12-step sponsor, has also said exactly the same that you did. It's seeking a spiritual experience. And if you have experienced that spiritual experience somewhere else, then stick with that,
100%.
And that doesn't mean that I might not change my mind in the future, but right now I still think it's a bad idea because I'm still scared of losing myself to that. And I did also try and do a Vipassana, but I got sick before I was meant to go, so I had to cancel. So it's good to hear somebody else that managed to do it.
Yeah, that's a shame because you should definitely give it a try. It was amazing. I mean, I actually got sick whilst I was on the retreat. I was full of a cold. And
Wow.
at the end of the retreat, the guy who I was sharing the room with said, "I didn't think you were going to make it. You were that unwell." And I thought to myself, "There's no way I'm giving up," because it was a beautiful experience.
Wow.
But yeah, I think your sponsor's right, and I think ultimately I was about 6 or 7 years sober when this ayahuasca idea was first presented to me. And I was about 5 years sober, and I didn't do it for another couple of years because, as I said, I was petrified of the idea myself, and it was a risk. It was in hindsight, some people thought I was really stupid for even attempting it, and I did know that it was a risk, but I was because I'd never had those experiences before. I was confident that I didn't think it was something that I was going to get back into. But you sound like you've got a great life and you've had a spiritual experience. So why would you need to? Ultimately, your sponsor's spot on. You're chasing a spiritual experience, and and yes, you do have one. But if you don't need to have one because your life's good and you're comfortable in your own skin, then stick with what you're doing. Definitely.
Absolutely. And if that changes, then it changes then. But right now I'm all good. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it's rough, occasionally this journey of sobriety and this different way of life is rough. And there's been times where I've questioned it, and there's been times where I've been on the phone to my sponsor and I've been like, are you sure it wasn't better back then? I think it was easier. I actually cannot cope with this pain and loneliness anymore, going through a breakup in 2018. And it took me a year to detach and actually, start piecing myself together again because of the trauma from that and guilt and all of that juicy stuff that we carry with us, and unresolved issues and lack of closure. And I had a really rough year, where I really questioned my sobriety, and I'm so glad that I didn't give up. I'm so glad that I just kept going, and I've been through situations, death, people relapsing, people maybe choosing a different way of life, people leaving, me doing extensive traveling, which can actually affect a human being in the sense of never really feeling that you belong somewhere, because I have a life in Cape Town and I have a life in England, and those two lives are actually very different. So to come back to England is great, but it's almost like, oh, okay, so who am I when I'm in England? And then when I come back to Cape Town, I feel so much more at peace in Cape Town, but it's that like catch-22 of, but I miss some people in England. There's more money to be made in England. My parents are in England. My mum's in the north and my dad's in the south. And it's, there is a questioning of, who am I? Where do I belong? And I go through that a lot. And if I didn't have recovery, and I didn't have my connections and, my sponsor and people that I can openly talk about this with, I think life would be very different. I think it would be really different.
That's why meditation's so important, isn't it? Because it actually gets you in touch with who you really are.
Yeah. And also giving yourself a break.
Yeah.
Like, it's all good. You're feeling a bit crap today. Like, just chill out.
Yeah. Eat the chocolate.
That's been one of the biggest things. Exactly. Just don't do it for more than 3 days. Like, that's how I've been able to manage myself. Like, 3 has been my magic number, and it's come up in my therapy sessions many times. And it's how I've learned to manage things. Like, if I am binging on food for more than 3 days in a row, there's something serious going on with myself, and I really need to look at it.
Yeah.
It's just been a journey of discovery in how I can manage my insecurities, and stuff came up last week around my milestone, and I'm in a new relationship at the moment, and it's very slowly developing, and it's amazing. He's a muggle. By muggle, I mean he's not in the fellowship.
A normal.
Well, he's definitely not normal, but that's why I like him. But he's not in the fellowship, and my relationships that I've had whilst I've been in recovery, my longer relationships have been with people that have been in the fellowship, and I got vulnerable, and I said to him, my milestone's coming up, and usually it's quite a sensitive time, and this is what I've learned about myself, and I might lose the plot, basically. So I think I managed myself quite well, especially as we're in this lockdown, and I chose to go and spend 3 weeks of the lockdown with him, in this new relationship. I only met him in October. Yeah. And it's actually been really cool, and things have come up, and I've been able to manage them through meetings, meditation, keeping myself busy with other things, and also, wait for it, communication. And actually, and actually being able to put myself out there, and even though I'm terrified, because this is one thing that I really struggle with, it's speaking about myself and what I need. Yeah. And it's really funny because there was one night where I was trying to talk about how I was feeling, and I just started to cry, and I just said to him, evidently this is really difficult for me to talk about myself and what I need right now. So please excuse the tears, and the tears were falling. And I'm laughing and smiling, but I'm getting really vulnerable at the same time. And that for me is recovery. That's amazing. That's awesome. To be able to do that with somebody in a new relationship, that is big growth for me right now.
Absolutely. What does life in recovery mean to you?
Oh, it just reminds me of this question that I heard from somebody that's 15,000 years sober. He's Scottish, and I met him really early in my process, and he came to do talks every week whilst I was in rehab, and he is still a primary contact for me today. He's in his 70s.
Yeah.
And he said to me, how free do you want to be? And recovery for me is freedom. Freedom from the obsessive nature that I find within me, which, is whatever that means, from whatever portal that it might transcend. It's just freedom. It's being courageous. It's being vulnerable. It's having self-acceptance, finding acceptance with other people, trying to release judgment of myself and other people, and just trying to be a decent person, trying to be there for other people, and remove myself from a situation, trying not to take things personally, trying to see the bigger picture, but most of all, having fun without getting wasted.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I can still go to festivals now, and I can still go to a club. I don't do it very often, but I still go out. I just don't drink and I don't use drugs. I mean, like, what a concept. And I still feel the music like I felt when I was wasted. And I think that was the most important thing for me, was I was scared of letting go of that feeling when we used to go out, like just bringing us back full circle to the days where we used to go out and feel connected. I can still feel connected now. I just don't use drugs or drink.
Well, you'll love this story. A couple of years ago, I went out. I was living out in Gran Canaria for a short period, and a couple of my really close friends were out in Ibiza. So I went out there and I met them, and I stayed out for about 4 or 5 days raving with them, totally sober, obviously. And I was on the dance floor in DC10, and Carl Cox was smashing out the tunes, and I was raving my little heart out, and I was so high just off the vibe that I felt like I was coming up on pills. And about 10 yards in front of me, I just saw the back of this guy who looked just like a friend of mine in London. Anyway, I danced over to him and I just kind of like looked round his, round his shoulder, tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned round, and it was my friend Joe, who's also in recovery. And he just looked
Amazing.
at me, give each other a massive hug, and he was like, "You're not on drugs, are you?" And I was like, "No, I'm totally sober." He's like, "You're not on drugs, are you?" He's like, "No, I'm totally sober." And it's like the most amazing, coincidental, synchronistic God instance ever. My mind was just kind of blown by the fact that I was like feeling so high just off the music, and that a friend of mine in recovery was right in front of me. It was absolutely beautiful.
Oh my God, I've got goosebumps. Oh!
So
it actually makes me feel really emotional hearing that. Yeah.
So you can go. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that I can go out and have just as much fun as I used to have without taking any substances whatsoever.
Absolutely. And I've been back to Ibiza twice. Once with somebody that I used to go out partying with, and the second time was for a wedding with a whole bunch of people that I used to go out partying with. And they were still doing what they needed to do, popping in and out of the toilet occasionally. But I was just like, do you know what? I can do this. And if I can do this, if I can come back to Ibiza, I mean, like, I can do anything, So thanks for the reminder.
And what would you say if you had to
Yeah.
say, kind of like give one piece of advice to anybody, maybe an old friend of ours, or just anybody that's struggling or considering, giving recovery a try? What would you say?
Oh gosh, there's many things, but I think, the fundamental thing is there's so many things running through my head right now. You deserve to give yourself a chance. And I think, if anybody has considered this life-changing move, just try it. Just try it for 6 months, try it for a year. You know, somebody said to me, just try it for a year. If it's not for you, then go for it. Just collect your year tag, celebrate, take a cake, talk about it, and then go to the pub if you want. The thing is, I didn't want to go. I was like, screw that. I want to like make 10.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm here for the foreseeable future, guys. So
Yeah.
I think I think my one piece of advice is like, you deserve to have peace in your heart, you know, and whatever that looks like, step forward, take that leap, and the net will appear.
That is beautiful, Mel. I think we'll leave it there.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you and to share and to be a
Welcome.
part of your fabulous platform.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure. It's really great catching up with you and hearing the story. And I hope that you continue to live that life beyond your wildest dreams out in South Africa.
Thank you. You too. And I'm sure I will see you in sunny Blighty when all this craziness is over.
Yes.
And let's just acknowledge how grateful we both are to be sober during this time in 2020.
Definitely.
Because I would not have been hoarding toilet roll, I can assure you that.
I definitely wouldn't have been staying in for 6 weeks, that's for sure.
Nope.
Cool. All right then. Well, when you're over in the UK, let me know and we'll definitely meet up and go grab a coffee.
Amazing, definitely. So much love heading your way. Have a great
You
day.
too.
Thanks so much again.
Take care.
Really appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Cool. Bye.